imagine the honor, imagine the thrill of introducing these two women. What they've done for me and for all of us really is incalculable. So I'm just going to say a few words. I'm Ann Snitow, the Director of Gender Studies until recently, and I want to introduce the new Director of Gender Studies. Terry, where are you? Stand up. Woo! I'm very proud of Lang College, of course for bringing Belle, and I hope that she comes many times more, but also for Stephanie Browner and the whole college's support of gender studies. We're growing, we're burgeoning, we have 50 minors now, we're now all over the university, and I'm so proud of this, and particularly of Lang's leadership and support. Where are you, Stephanie? Thank you very much, Dean Browner. We can see people. Yeah, it's fun to see people. Maybe somebody could manage that. Okay. I have 5 minutes, and so rather than give you the long list of the books and honors these people have won, which I think, first of all, in this crowd is well known, I'd rather just spend a moment talking about each of them in a way that comes from the depth of my experience with them in the last many years. Starting with Gloria. Gloria, you became a leader by 1970. Being a leader in 1970 is something a lot of people here can't imagine. They're much too young to know what you went through. You weren't supposed to be a leader of the feminist movement. There were supposed to be no leaders. And as a result, all the people who became the attention of media, who were very visible, and certainly with the creation of Ms. Magazine, you know, a location that was clear to all, you had to suffer that constant tension. In the green room, Gloria said she solved this partly by always going with some other woman to speak, which is just exactly what I wanted to say about what I think you did. I think it's astounding how you took on the problem of being a leader. Astounding how you turned this into relentless commitment, the expansion of feminism into places where it was never slated to go, not soon or easily. How you carried the passion for feminism you had to very different kinds of women. How you sought for inclusion. How you sought for community. How you broadened what it was that the project would be. This was so difficult. There was so much pushback, particularly in the early days. I think you must have been a deeply generous, for sure, but also a deeply humble person to have been able to serve feminism in this way with such a sense of responsibility and relentless commitment. We're all in your debt for how you did this. There are no doubt many reasons we could name why feminism became a mass movement in the United States. It was a very complicated development with many contributing factors, but one of them was and is you. Now I'd like to go on and talk about Belle. Yes, we adore her. We learn from her. Her passion and her clarity and her brilliance as a feminist theorist and activist is well known to us all. So I want to say something else entirely, because those are the givens of this moment. I want to talk about 100 years from now. The books that Belle has written and will write are going to be classics of the feminist movement. Now, I speak here for a moment as a literary critic, and I ask you, why is it these books are beyond just brilliance, that's nice, and prescientness, and greatness as theory? They are dialogic in a way that very few books of feminist theory, in or outside of academia, ever are. She asks the questions we want to hear asked. She finds things she answers things that we crave to know. She's listening and responding every minute. Sometimes she discovers things that we crave to know that we don't know we crave to know yet. There's a way in which she's embedded, and of course the form you've chosen here of conversation is a perfect example of this, that you chose this kind of format for so many events we've had, that it's in conversation, it's in exchange, it's in this constant broil of communication and an effort to both delineate what a radical feminist and anti-racist commitment looks like, and at the same time, to reach out, connect, include. It's so unusual. The books have a quality that will live, and so they're nurturing us, and they will nurture people for many decades, as far as I can see. I can't see beyond my kenning, as the Indian tribe used to say, but as far as I can see, which is, I hope, quite far, these books are going to be important to us and to those who come after because of the intensity and passion of their efforts to have the conversation with the whole culture. I love them, and we all do, and we're so grateful for them. Thanks, Val.
Gloria Marie that, I always tell Gloria Marie that I'm going to die at 80, and she always tells me, well, I'm going to live to be 100, so you can't possibly die at 80, because I need you to be around to play with me. So that is the resilience of Steinem. And I think that resilience is what Anne was talking about. But we want to know, how are you feeling these days about feminism?
Just a little question like that?
Yeah.
Well, I bet like all of us here, I'm sometimes exulting, like I just got a letter from a 7-year-old little girl who gave her allowance in order for women in prison to have literature, who can top that, right? Right? I'm often furious, really deeply furious, when I see that for the first time that we know of, there are fewer females on Earth than males.
Wow, they managed to kill us all.
Right, because, for different reasons in different parts of the Earth, whether it's female infanticide or violence and sexual violence in wartime or domestic violence here, which has killed more women than since 9/11 than all the Americans killed in 9/11, Iraq, Afghanistan, So, and also sometimes I'm deeply impatient. You and I were talking about this because I think that it makes me angry now. Movements have a growth like a person. So first it's consciousness, and then you need to name yourself because you've been invisible, and then you need to gain strength and so on. But right now I think our movements are still in silos in a way that makes no sense because they're intermeshed. And that makes me very impatient.
For me, I've been talking somewhat since I've been here about this being the first time in my life that I've had feelings of doubt about feminism because of things moving in a direction. Like for me, I've always been the person who, I'm casting my vote for Hillary. And then the Hillary of this moment who is so hawkish, who is so pro things that I cannot support. So all of a sudden, I've had to make a big shift in the way that I think. And I've been thinking about that in general, about women. Because one of my constant themes is patriarchy has no gender. And I think that we have to remember that people's allegiance to patriarchy isn't static. That people can start off in feminism and unfortunately end up in patriarchy. And that has a lot to do with where women want to go. And we also, I think, Gloria, are at the most ambivalent moment of feminism. And I know that you have been in good solidarity with Sheryl Sandberg, and she seems to me to embody our ambivalence, both on one hand being a woman who supports feminism, and on the other hand being a woman who's supportive of various instrumentalities of patriarchy, so that it becomes harder for us to name in some kind of clear way, okay, these are our allies, and these are the people that we should stay away from. I think it's a chaotic moment for feminism globally, because there are so many tensions between feminism and nationalism, feminism and racism.
You're looking expectantly at me.
Actually, I was looking at this woman whom I love, and one thing I can say about her, and I hope that she can talk about, from the moment I met her, I saw that she lived the practice of anti-racism. You know, like a lot of white women within feminism would talk about racism, but then what they actually did in their lives. You know, it's like the white people you know who are all so progressive, but they don't have any black people that are ever in their lives. That's not Gloria Steinem. From the time I met her, she tried to make sure that I had optimal well-being in every way that she could. And I think that, okay, is this better? Okay, so that I want to hear from you what motivated you in your understanding of racism, your understanding of blackness and femaleness, which, you know, it's been a long, long time for you. And you've been loyal.
Well, you know, I don't think I'm smarter than anybody else. I think that when we're born, no, but I mean, okay, I don't know, but when we're, but I think as children, you know, as little children, we're born with this understanding, and we say things like, "You are not the boss of me." "It is not fair." You know, people come in different colors like flowers. I mean, you know, we have to be taught that it's crazy. And I lucked out in the following ways that I can think of now. One was I didn't go to school much at all until I was about 10 or 11. So I missed a brainwashing. One was that I accidentally, because I needed a job, worked in Rosedale. Anybody here from Washington, D.C., where there's the one swimming pool in a black neighborhood? There's one in Georgetown, which is entirely white. There's one in Rosedale. And I was the lifeguard, right? And so I was the only white person there. And it was really good for me to have the experience of being the only white person. Besides, I learned to play bidwhist and coon-can, and I could do bones. And then, most of all, I went to India. I lived in India so for 2 years when I got out of college. And then I came back, and I was conscious for the first time. I mean, I looked around, and I thought, I could go snowblind here. You know, there's so many white people. I mean, what's wrong? And then I got mad on my own behalf, and I think that that's important. You know, because if we're doing something for somebody else, we expect gratitude. We get mad on our own behalf. How dare people tell me who my friends are and where people can live and, you know, all of that. So, you know, I'm grateful for those experiences, because otherwise I wouldn't know and love you and know that one of the most revolutionary things that Bell says is, if you can buy shoes together, you can do politics together. I always loved that. I mean, you have to be friends and trust each other, and you can't just suddenly make a coalition. The question is, who do you have lunch with? Who do you go to the movies with? Does it look like the country? In about 20 minutes, this country is not going to be majority white European American country anymore.
We were talking earlier today in our session, how do we distinguish between the kind of awareness of imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy Gloria is talking about, and the eat, pray, love type of imperialism, which is still about seeing the other as a resource to enhance you. And I think that...
See how smart she is? Isn't that a brilliant... Is that not a brilliant way of putting it? Yeah, right.
But, because I think that many, many young white people especially feel this tension. Can I go to this country where there are people of color? And I think that the key words that we've been talking about the last couple of days have been hospitality that is mutual. And that is one thing I learned from watching you. A mutual hospitality, one that isn't just like, I'm the giver and bow down to me, but one that says, what is it that we can give each other? And that's the liberating hospitality. I've been talking about Dee Dee Risher's new book, The Soul Making Room, and she talks about going to live in China as a young woman and how she learned that it was that hospitality that went both ways that allowed her to grow and to develop and be strongly a lover of justice and anti-racist, and not some, what kind of things can I bring back from my trip? And Eat, Pray, Love person has her own little store kind of now that you can buy the things from, and I think that's an ongoing tension, not just for white people, but for all of us in the United States. That we not presume to know the, quote, other, that we not presume that the other has so much to give us, and not ask ourselves, what am I giving? I used to ask my students at Yale when they would say, well, I'm going off to Rwanda, or I'm going here, and I would say, well, what are you bringing with you? What are you bringing to the people that you are going to see? You are telling me what you hope to get from them. And that in and of itself was a decentering of whiteness, a decentering of imperialism, to think, what am I bringing? So what are do you think those things when you're going off to India? She tells me, okay, she always gets on my case when I talk about her being 80. She actually has the nerve to tell me nobody would know she was 80 unless I told them. But
I never said that. I am the most public 80-year-old.
But wait. But wait. So Gloria tells me that what she wants to do for her 80th birthday is go to Africa and ride the elephants.
I did.
And I was like, that's really great. Send me a postcard. Because I won't be going to Africa to ride the elephants. But I want you to talk a little bit more about what has changed within you over the years as you have been so immersed in the lives and the causes of women of color and black women in particular?
Well, first I want to say something. I want to ask you a question. Where did the generosity of spirit come to look at me and not see the baggage of whiteness? That is a miracle. A miracle.
Well, you know that Brene Brown, I think that's her name, she writes about vulnerability. And it's interesting that when I actually met Gloria Steinem for the first time, it was after I had fallen down in a hill. Do you remember this? And I had broken my hand and my wrist. And so we were doing a photo shoot for Ms. with Urvashi, Naomi,
Urvashi Bey?
yeah, but, I'm forgetting.
Don't worry.
But anyhow, Gloria was very concerned that I lived alone, and how was I going to put on my clothes, and what was I going to wear? And after talking with her, because it's true, I have to confess, I transgress. She knows I love fashion. And so,
That's where the shoes come in.
we went into this whole thing about what would I do? And Gloria decided, well, there are these tops that I know you can wear. You'll be able to take care of yourself. And she immediately sent them to me. It was, again, I think confronting your kindness, your consideration. I mean, let's face it, most white women feminists had not been kind to us black women, women of color. And her kindness was really the big seduction, you know, getting those fashions in the mail.
Well, I do think kindness, I mean, probably if we were going to pick one thing that we could name, kindness, just kindness, is absolutely right up there.
I mean, that's what the Dalai Lama talks about in Ethics for a New Millennium. You know, when he says that we can perhaps do without religion, but we cannot do without the values of...
We can definitely do without religion. Right.
Okay. Now, the diehard Bell Hooks fans in this room know that I am deeply religious, deeply spiritual. So my buddy over
Spiritual, okay, spiritual is great. Religion is, we've had this discussion. Religion to me is something else than spiritual.
But some people want to have both, and want to have both in a progressive, loving kindness way. That was actually one of the topics as I went around saying, you know, I'm going to talk to Gloria Steinem. What do you want me to talk to her about? And people said, well, you know, you're really into spirituality, and she's very secular. That's one of the things that you could talk to her about. So let's hear, how do you get by just being a secular person in the world?
I'm a spiritual person,
Well, say
but
more,
not
more.
a religious person. I really think, you know, there was this smart guy named Henry Breasted who was an Egyptologist, and he was talking about the gradual process of withdrawing God from nature and withdrawing God from women over millennia upon millennia, which you can see if you're ever traveling on the Nile, you know, you can see in the sculptures and so on. And he says that monotheism is but imperialism in religion. When God looks like the ruling class, you know you're fucked, basically. So
Well,
I mean, what's spiritual to me, and I think to you too, is that God is in every, you know, in the flowers and you and me and all living things.
Well, actually, that was something we were talking about earlier because my brother had come to me at one point and said he was just having a hard time with Jesus. We grew up in a church, all-black church, with this huge picture of Jesus, who, of course, was white and had the lovely brown locks.
I rest my case.
No, but I mean, in front of Jesus was a world, and his hands were outstretched. And at the foot of the world were black and brown people. I mean, this is the image that we looked at from the time we were born to the time we left home at 18. And my brother was saying to me as a man in his late 50s, I just can't take it anymore. I can't get that white Jesus out of my head. And I was saying earlier that part of my own shift as a young woman to Buddhism was the fact that Buddha came in all colors, sizes, shapes, with all different kinds of expressions on the Buddha face. And I'm writing a piece right now for Shambhala's son about what does that collective imaging, what's the impact that it has on us as people of color. In my house, there are way too many Buddhas, because you know the way people find out you like something, and they were like, okay, Belle, I'm sending you a Buddha, but they're all colors. And some Buddhas I actually purchase from Ross Dress for Less. I tell people like, I go shopping at Ross Dress for Less, and the Buddhas say, Belle, don't leave me here. I was never meant to live my life at Ross Dress for Less. And some of those Buddhas are the most colorful, gaudy, you know, reds, greens. But I feel like when I wake up in the morning and I walk about my home and I'm surrounded by these deities of many colors, it alters something within me. In the same way that I think black people who have only had the opportunity to know white Jesus have something altered within them. I mean, that same church that had white Jesus had these rules. A female could not walk across the platform. that was reserved for men only because we were unclean. And I remember, as a little girl wanting to ask my mother to explain, why can't we walk across? Why can't we speak from that platform? So that we see that intersectionality of racism and sexism cooperating with one another. And how do we disconnect? Of course, New York City, I encourage all of you to take time, if you haven't gone, to the Rubin Museum. They did an incredible show a while ago on the female Buddha. And so that you, again, see what it means to see all of this power in different sizes, shapes, genders. And I think that Black people, will we ever really be able to decolonize our minds if we cannot find a way to imagine deities that resemble ourselves?
And that exhibit at the Rubin was, I think, an exhibit, the only one maybe in this country, of Bon, B-O-N, maybe I'm not pronouncing it right. Yeah, but it's what preceded Buddhism. And it was much more pagan in the real sense of pagan, of God and all living things. And the residual female bodhisattvas really come from Bon, and the nature things like prayer flags and so on. And the places in the Himalayas that have been more or less in touch, say Bhutan, with the world, still have more of this pre-Buddhist Bon universal spirituality. There, I went to the temple, which is, several centuries old, Buddhist temple, and the guide is taking us around, and he says, well, a missionary, a Buddhist missionary from Nepal caused us to build this temple, but we didn't use it for the first 100 years. I said, why not? He said, well, if you have a waterfall, why do you need a temple? I said, I couldn't agree with you more. Right. So I think when we follow backward, we see that this time of patriarchy, monotheism, racism, nationalism, this experiment that failed, we should declare it over today and go on to something else, it is relatively new. I mean, think about the 500 or 600 nations that were here in the first place. They were matrilineal, not matriarchal, not like women, but mostly they seem to have been matrilineal. There weren't, in the language, there wasn't even he and she. People were people. Imagine that. Right. Women controlled their own fertility and decided when and whether to give birth. It was quite a balance. It's what our Constitution comes from. It's what inspired the suffrage movement. And we're just rediscovering this because it was cut off from us for both political reasons and reasons of guilt, because we killed 90% of them, right? So, and the most amazing thing to me is about these, what I think of as original cultures all over the world, is I don't know how they can bear what has happened, but what they say, like what Wilma Mankiller said and what people say that Dalits in India said, we're still here. We're still here. It's so moving to me. So, a friend of mine is writing a book about the Iroquois Confederacy, and it's called Everything We Want Once Was Here. And that somehow gives me faith that it's not human nature. That their paradigm was the circle, not the pyramid, not the hierarchy.
Well, Baldwin says in his essay, The Male Prison, which you can find in Nobody Knows My Name, who cares about human nature? That we can believe that human nature is at the core of many things, but why do we have to be stuck in human nature? Why can't we be caught up in the drama of transformation and transcendence? And he's particularly saying, why do we have to be black and white or male and female? Why can't we look for some kind of inner core of being authentic selves? And so I think that takes us back to feminism, because it does seem to me that there is the feminism that is still about men are the enemy, women need to organize ourselves against men, and then there are the people like me who say patriarchy has no gender. What are your thoughts about that?
You know, I know very few people who would say all men are the enemy, or that, you know, I mean, it's
I think you're being generous, Gloria.
No, really, we're not. I mean, I can't think of anybody, you know, because on the contrary, feminists have kind of terminal gratitude for good men, you know. But I
sit around, I mean, come on, a lot of you do, in spaces in everyday life, and heteronormative women are the worst. And that when we begin to talk about men, a lot of hate is expressed.
Well, that was what Rita Mae Brown said early in the movement. She got up at some big meeting and accused all the heterosexual feminists of introducing man-hating into the movement because, you know, and the phrase was then man-hating lesbians in that era, right? She said, listen, lesbians don't hate men. We can take them or leave them, you know. It's you people who are dependent on
I mean, isn't that one of the paradoxes of internalized oppression and domination, that so many of the women who are with men, who are experiencing the everyday violence of patriarchy, will in fact be the most harsh in their critique of men,
well, it's
but
because,
then no desire to separate
well, it's because
from
they're closest to, I mean, it's the same thing in class and race and caste, you know, the more dependent you are, the more familiar you are, you know, with the more powerful group, the more mad you are, and the more knowledgeable you are, both.
Well, I would take the more knowledgeable, Gloria. I wouldn't take the dependent, because I remember in that heyday of feminism for myself, when there was always this idea that if we would just get our own money and our own jobs, we would be able to break away from the patriarchy. And one of the heartaches...
But I always had my own money and my own job, even though I was getting paid less for the articles and so on. And it didn't, I mean, you know, I think we had more in mind. We always had more in mind than that. You know, we
but
didn't
I'm
really...
actually saying that women have more economic power, and yet we remain wedded to patriarchy in ways that are so unclear.
Okay, we're going to go on a speaking tour together, and you're going to listen to audiences like this, and you're going to feel better. It's not that bad. No, really.
I suppose, you know, some of you may know that I'm giving the keynote address at the National Women's Studies Association this year, and it's caused me to think a lot about feminism and where it is. And the one issue that I find most disturbing as I think about feminism is the question of violence. Violence on all levels, violence against children, perpetrated very often by women as well as men, violence in general. And some days I make lists of, well, okay, what has feminism done for us? And I am amazed at the incredible revolutions in our lives that feminism produced. But the one area, it seems to me, where we haven't seen incredible revolutions has been in the area of violence.
No, absolutely, and that's, you know, again, as the Native American wisdom on this is, it takes 4 generations to heal one act of violence. You know, because it normalizes violence in the home. I mean, for instance, you know, I started out saying now there are fewer females on earth than males. That comes from a big and readable study called Sex and World Peace by Valerie Hudson. And, you know, what that is showing that the most reliable indicator of whether a country will be violent inside itself, in its streets and so on, or will be willing to use military violence against another country, is actually not poverty or access to natural resources or religion or even degree of democracy. It's violence against females. Not because female life is more important than male, but because it normalizes everything else. If in your house you come to believe that dominant passive is okay, that controller and controlled is okay, that's, you know, then it normalizes it for everything else, and class fits into it, and race and caste fits into it. I mean, the caste system from India wasn't there in the beginning when was populated in the South. It came when light-skinned folks, and then the caste system redoubled sexism in order to perpetuate caste. These things are just, so interwoven, and it's going to take time, because what we experienced in our households it's a miracle to me. It's a miracle to me that we know now we're not crazy. The system is crazy. I mean, this is huge that we that our consciousness has changed. And I feel, I don't know. I really don't know whether there's time to do what we need to do. I mean, it's possible that this spaceship Earth is going to perish.
Well, I also think, I've been reading, again, Fugitive Information by Kay Hagan,
Right.
and I've been reading a lot of the works of early feminism where there was much greater emphasis on women getting away from men, getting away from the domestic household, getting away from the heteronormative as a way of making ourselves into the free woman warriors, independent beings that we want to be. And I've been checking my own self out. I mean, you all know who followed me, how long I've been saying I'm looking for love. And recently I actually asked myself, are you really looking for love, Belle? Are you really looking for a man? Are you really, because everywhere I turn, especially in, quote, age-appropriate men, the over 50 crowd, I don't see anything but patriarchy. And I actually wake up and I'm happy to be in my house with me, because like Miss Gloria here, everything in my house loves me, honey. When I wake up in the morning, the objects in my life call out to me. I mean, I have Audre Lorde's Litany for Survival facing me right when I get out of bed. I have so many beautiful images created by women that face me as I go about my day. The artwork of Emma Amos, a very sad photo of Billie Holiday taken by the black photographer who's dead now, Manetta Sleet, who took photos for Life magazine. But everything in that space calls out to me.
But we should be able,
And that your
men
space
and
too.
women, yeah.
Her space calls out to me with lots of objects I could take home.
And some of the same Emma Amos. We have a lot of overlap here in our. We all need a nest. And, we're two things. We are unique individual creatures that are the combination of who knows how many millennia of heredity and environment combined in a way that could never happen again and could never have happened before. And we are communal creatures. The universal punishment, I think, is isolation, because, we are communal. And if we're by ourselves, we come to feel wrong, crazed. So it's not an either or. I never understood the nature versus nurture thing, because obviously it's both. We need community and we need uniqueness. And I was thinking when you were talking about, the way out of hierarchy, I think we need simple ways, if we are accustomed to power, we probably need to remember to listen as much as we talk. If we are not accustomed to power, we probably need to remember to talk as much as we listen. But the goal is the same. It's some kind of balance. Right?
Well, what do we do with the fact, earlier today we were talking about the messages that a lot of girls are getting in their preschools and schools. And so this is before they have the shield that feminism gives to many of us. And from those messages, they're often being told, and we can talk about racialized sexism, as the little black girl told me last week, that the students informed her, you can't be Cinderella because Cinderella ain't black. And her...
Good luck for Cinderella, I would say, but never mind. Okay.
Internalized self-hatred is so clear and overt at 4 years old. One thing I have to say about growing up in segregated black communities, where y'all know there was a lot of colored caste going on, But there was very little articulation of the levels of self-hate that we hear among black children today. Of course, the media did not rule our lives in quite the same way that it does today. And so, I mean, the whole question becomes, how do we educate for critical consciousness? I mean, I do remember, don't you, Gloria, when we were the height of contemporary feminist movement, there was much more focus on children, on books. What type of books were we writing for children? And I have to say that, you know, when my favorite Bell Hooks children's book is B-Boy Buzz. But when I tried to write...
How about Happy to be Nappy?
It's not my favorite. But B-Boy Buzz was the challenge, because how do you write a book in patriarchy about loving boys that doesn't reinforce the patriarchal notion that boys are somehow better than girls? And I really struggled. And I mean, the thing about Bell Hooks children's book, they're like paragraphs. But the struggle to come up with a language that would embrace the boy and that would talk about boys' need for solitude, for quiet, for companionship of other boys without reinforcing patriarchy took so many more hours. And I think about that. When I think about struggles that I think as feminist believers we have given up, because it just takes a lot of time to reinvent and to decolonize. And then you've got to sell your decolonized product to the non-decolonized world, which becomes a really, really difficult thing. I feel lucky with all the books that I have because I was able to sell them. I just want to speak out a word, you know, for South End Press, which published my early books. I've been with the press that is now defunct for 40 years. And I wept a lot at the close of this independent left books publishing, because with them I had such a deep and profound relationship of dialectical exchange. I remember when I sent them Ain't I a Woman, and they said that it was so angry, they weren't sure they could publish it. And I thought, angry? What are they talking about? You know, why is it that whenever we speak our truths as black females, especially our truths in resistance to domination, that label of being angry follows us like a tornado. And sometimes it really destroys us.
I think it's guilt talking. You know, I mean, I think it's white people, men, white men, whoever it is, the dominant group, out of guilt saying, you're going to do to me what I did to you. That's their fear. And that isn't what we want to do. I mean, we've seen what, you know, crazed superiority has done to them. We don't want to do that, you know. But it is guilt talking, and it's deep. And it takes it because they've been raised, they got born into this thing that raised them to believe that in order to be, quote unquote, masculine, you had to be in control. And at the extreme of that, we see what I think of as superiority crimes, you know, crimes that from which you get no money, no gain, no nothing, and men often even commit suicide after committing the crime, whether it's you know, killing strangers or their own wives and families and so on. But it's about being hooked on a drug of control.
But so what has feminism done to intervene on that?
Well, for one thing, we've said it's not normal, necessary, inevitable, it's wrong, it's against the law. I mean, in my neighborhood, it was, you know, when I was growing up in Toledo, right, there was no crime called domestic violence. It was called life, you know. And the goal of the cops, the success in their view, was to get the criminal and the victim back together. You know, so, you know.
Tell us more about what contemporary feminism has done to intervene on that.
Well, we've obviously, you know, we've allowed the law into the house. There was jurisprudence up to then that said that it's more important to preserve the privacy of the household than it is to punish the violence or the crime that's going on. So we allowed law into the household. We defined domestic violence, which actually I think is maybe not the right term. Maybe it should be original violence, because everything else follows that.
Or primal violence.
Or primal violence. We've obviously, I mean, I don't have, you all know that, I mean, shelters are great. Obviously, women and kids shouldn't have to leave the house. It should be the criminal who leaves it. But this, I think we know the steps that we have taken, but what we probably still don't know, as I was saying earlier, is that this is the paradigm that normalizes other violence. We still see it as somewhat separate and apart and somehow not as serious, when in fact it is the seed of other violence.
When I work at a high school, a special high school for girls who have committed violent crimes, what they express is a lot of glee in violence and happiness, as well as their love of cocaine or some other kind of drug that may have fueled their violent behaviors. And it has led me to question, have we in fact created a world where, rather than men overall becoming less violent, females overall have become more violent, more willing to do harm to themselves, to ourselves, to children, to men in our lives?
Well, obviously we're dealing with trying to change norms here, which is huge. But some of it is if it's not going to change, I don't think, until men are raising children as much as women do, because that's the way that men become whole people, just like women become whole people by being out in the world. We all have the same circle of human qualities, but some are masculine over here and some are feminine over here. So progress is in the direction you haven't been, so to speak, trying to create this full circle of human qualities, not in, and we know, that if a man takes care of a baby or a small child, the oxytocin increases in his brain. What makes us able to empathize with each other and to not just know, but to understand and to care, that increases. If a woman is in combat, testosterone increases in her. We all have oxytocin and we all have testosterone, and a lot of it is the norms and the atmosphere which we can change. We can change. Look, the human beings have the longest infancy of any animal, I believe, because our heads are so big that we can't be born as developed as other animals are. So if 85% of our brain, something like that, develops outside the womb, we are incredibly subject to the influences around us. That's both the good news and the bad news. It depends what the influences are.
Well, it's interesting because just being here in the West Village and wandering around, and you see all these white men that are parenting, quote, and you recognize, I mean, and I'm not trying to mock that. I mean, you see the tenderness, the gentleness that many of them are showing to their children, but they're not more gentle in the world. When he drops off his wonderful little adored girl and goes to Wall Street, or many of those places of supreme violence in our world right now, his having parented doesn't seem to have changed what he does there.
We don't know that.
We know that from the impact, Gloria.
No, we don't. I mean, we know from, wait a minute, we know from all the studies of men who parent more, are more equal partners, that they're less violent. I mean, we know that. But I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm not saying the influence of the world doesn't come down upon Wall Street and so on. But we know we can have an influence in that way. Was your father a nurturing father?
Heck no, he was a patriarchal terrorist. Oh, that word that gets me into trouble.
I know, we used to have the ladies dining in terrorist society, we had to give it up to.
Well, I was reminded that one of my goddaughters had called me up when she was 8, and she was like, look, my mother is a terrorist, and you need to do something about this. You need to talk with her. And I was actually thinking about the Bush administration and how the Bush administration changed all our ways of thinking about the word terrorist. That when did it become this overly charged word, this word that would only have negative, deeply negative, death-oriented evocations, and not, its basic meaning of the evocation of dread or extreme fear. And it seems to me in that sense our relationship to the word has become very conservatized, and that in participating in that conservatization, we collude in those forms of imperialism that see any person of color who is in an act of resistance as potentially a terrorist. Okay, moving on from
besides, it's a word. It's like the sticks and stones argument, I mean, it's where I agree that the word has been co-opted, right? I wonder how much we, again, we had different experiences growing up. My father, who was supremely irresponsible. I mean, there was no person on earth who could compete with him for irresponsibility, but he was loving, and he liked my company. I wasn't in school, so I was going around with him to try to sell his things that he bought at auction, little jewelry and cups and whatever in the car. I was his friend. I mean, here's a father story. Was his favorite story about me, but I think it's about him. When I was like 4 or something, we were in some little country store in Michigan, and I asked him for a nickel. And he said, what for? And according to him, I said, you can give it to me or you can not give it to me, but you can't ask me what it's for. So that's what I mean about kids. Kids are saying it's not fair, right? And he said, that's right. And he gave me the nickel. I mean, so I lucked out in the father department.
Well, I think we haven't articulated enough how can men father with love within this imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist, patriarchal system. And I think that black females, especially black female single moms, experience not so much the present cruel patriarchal father, but the absent father. I mean, how many single black moms are hoping and wishing that they could get the father to show some interest in children, in his children, to call when he says he will, to come by when he says he will. And that, I think these are, to me, concrete feminist issues and terrains that we just haven't dealt with adequately enough.
But no, we haven't. But there are things that makes me think of. For instance, there was a project, or I don't know what it was called Oh Boy Babies. Now what this grew out of was that in a public school with diverse little boys who I think in the 5th grade, they went to a child care center twice a week to take care of babies. This was something that somehow the center and the school had arranged. At first, the boys said, ew, diapers and, right. And then, of course, they got interested in babies. Babies are interesting. Secondly, that made them feel grown up, we're taking care of babies. So every time they went, just before they went, they would say, oh boy, babies. And that gave the name to the program. Okay, we could do that again. Sometimes we as women also, I think of it as the get out of my kitchen complex, the sort of, it's our domain, children and the kitchen, and so we don't want men in there because we want some domain in which we have control. So what if they don't do it right? I mean, I grew up on candy bars and black raspberry ice cream with my father, right?
Well, Well, so, I mean, since we're talking about transgression, let's hear some about your marrying a man after years of not doing that. And
At 66, you know, I figure I was 66 when I got married. Okay.
so talk some about that.
Well,
A lot of people were disappointed and angry, like, how could she betray the movement?
no, well, it's always good to be unexpected, I feel. We loved each other. We wanted to be together. We were together. He had been born in South Africa, so you know, he was having visa problems. He was sure that all the folks in the INS, the then INS, were out to get him and so on. So we began to talk about it, and we realized that the only way he could be sure of having a green card was through marriage, because then it becomes the right of the U.S. citizen, right? I don't think at that age, I mean, he was 59 or 60, I was 66. I don't think we would have thought about marriage if it hadn't been for the green card situation, but it wasn't that we didn't love each other, want to be together. You know, we did.
So did marriage change you?
No. At 66, you think you're going to change? No.
I guess she changed him. You'd call her house and he'd answer the phone and he'd say, "Hello, goddess."
Yeah, he was a really loving, kind, wonderful man who I guess I should credit my father with, because also, like my father, he also had no possessions. He didn't give a shit about money. He was carrying his jeans around.
Not the kind of man for me. So Gloria, tell us, in this long journey with feminism, can you tell us some of what has been most important about feminism in the making of Gloria Steinem?
You. No, really. I mean, it's about friends and sisters and community, and it's a chosen. The good part, the great part, is it's about chosen family. I mean, I feel like we have each other's backs, right? And we have people about whom we feel that. And that is so precious. It isn't that our birth families are not super important, but I think they're important in a somewhat different way. Because in your birth family, uniquely, you see the different stages of life. You know, you see what it's like to have a baby, to grow old, right. And also, as Dorothy Dinnerstein said so brilliantly, one of the purposes of family is to learn how to get along with and even love people you don't like. Because, and that's important for the future of the human race, you know. Because uniquely in a family, you're together, you're nurturing each other, and you probably don't agree or share interests. In the movement and in friendships, we get to pick people because we share interests and values. So it's both things are really important.
I want to say that Dorothy Dinnerstein was the author of the very amazing book, The Mermaid and the Minotaur. Because one of the things that's happening with a lot of those early feminist books that were so powerful is they're out of print and people are forgetting them, and they're forgetting the power that they had in shaping our consciousness and in our theory.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I have just started to do for Open Road, which is an online publisher you may know, which publishes mine and Alice Walker's and maybe I don't know, but it's a good online. So I'm going to do life-changing. We all need to do this for each other anyway. To describe a life-changing, out-of-print book or a new book or whatever it is, the kind of book you're not quite the same person after you read it as you were before. Do you know what I mean? Because it is terribly, terribly important that we preserve, that, as you point out, we preserve each other's lives and we preserve books. books are like people, you know? We need to hang on to them.
Well, I have been thinking a lot about this, particularly because of how quickly we seem to be forgetting so many Black women thinkers and writers. You know, when I go to the classroom and people don't know Pat Parker's work, Audre Lorde, all the different women thinkers, Black women thinkers, it has made me much more acutely aware of the importance of archives, of memory. So, okay, so I hear you're going to have some big chair in your name. At what institution?
Yeah, Rutgers.
Okay.
And this, I have to say, you know, to be frank, I didn't know what a chair was. Do you know what I mean? But Alison Bernstein, who is somebody, perhaps some of you know, who's done a lot of foundation work and academic work and lived in South Africa, and, you know, a great universal person, had the idea of creating the first chair that was for, that combined media, culture, and women's studies, and you know, into one. So it's not just the media, but the message too. And it's named after me, to my amazement. So
what I can
it's
say
a
is
surprise.
I now feel that there should be a chair. If Gloria's getting a chair named
right.
after her, she's always set the standard for many of us in terms of, okay, this is a journey. We might need to go on for various reasons. And I've been much more hard-headed most of my life around archival stuff. But with the death of my parents, the death of one of my sisters, the Alzheimer's of another one, I've come to see how important women's archives are. Those of you who, I now publish pretty much with Routledge, and if you see the exhibit here at the New School, one of the things that changed for me, Gloria, I mean, I have always been anti-picture taking, but in the new books, the new Bell Hooks books that have been reissued, there are family photos on all of them, because I've come to see how important it is, that mirror into which we look and see ourselves. I mean, if you look at this exhibit, there is Bell Hooks, the fat, no-hair baby, sitting on a bed, donning the cover of Talking Back. And now I look at that image and I think, this is really important. This image of who shaped me, of what I am, of how I started out. I mean, a Black girl starting out with no hair, that's a very deep thing in Black culture. And who knows the degree to which that imprint shaped me. The fact that people weren't saying how cute I was, look at all my hair, look at all that long hair, look at all that straight hair. Instead, they were constantly questioning, when do you think that she'll get some hair? And you can see this image, you can see all the new images. Where are they here at the New School? On the Sky Bridge. And I want to take the time to thank Stephanie and her crew, Heather, who's moving on, much to break my heart, to a new and exciting job, and Jennifer and all the people who make these residencies possible, who make it possible for Gloria Marie to talk with Gloria Jean, my given name. We have a lot of fun playing with our different names. When we walk down the street together and people are shouting out Gloria, I often think that they're calling me. But unfortunately, they tend to be calling Steinem more. So Gloria, tell us one more thing. For me, the heart of feminist movement in my life has been the constant affirmation of me as a thinker, as an intellectual, as a critical thinker. And, you know, in the Black church, we sing a song, I wouldn't take nothing for my journey now. That's how I feel about feminism, that I wouldn't take anything for that journey, because it's that journey that propelled me into that writing, into these books, into the dream and hope of creating work that would help people grow and heal and self-actualize.
Yes.
You want to say?
Yeah.
Oh, we're open.
Yeah. For me, part of there's the communal joy of feminism, which is irreplaceable, and there's the aha joy of feminism, which is irreplaceable. You suddenly realize why something is happening. The aha, it's like an orgasm of the mind. Oh, that's why, and it's. And I get it from life. I get it from your work. I get it. You see the why of things, and that allows you to see that they could change and how they could change.
How did it feel then when you were writing Revolution from Within, and you were exposing the reality that lots of women had better jobs, better things, but that the interior life of women was not changing? That our self-esteems were not changing. How did that breakthrough insight feel for you, Gloria, and writing about it?
Well, I got it from the civil rights movement, because the civil rights movement made us understand internalized oppression. That the systems of oppression that involve vast numbers of people wouldn't work unless they were internalized. And what I noticed as I was, being an organizer around the country, is that there weren't books to explain that exactly. I mean, there were books about external change, and there were, as if that was all, and there were books about internal change, as if you just changed yourself, everything would be fine, which isn't true, of course. And I just wanted to write a book that hooked them up. And I read a Polish revolutionary writer who was talking about the moment revolution begins is when there's a crowd in the street, the police are around the demonstrators. A policeman looks at one of the demonstrators and knows the demonstrator is not afraid. And that is the beginning of the revolution. And we need each other to have this kind of security. If we, in the right world, we would be sitting in a circle. We wouldn't be looking at each other's backs. We would be able to see each other and talk to each other. So I just wanted to write a book that hooked up internal to external change, that did the full circle. It got a completely predictable response, which was the East Coast hated it and the West Coast loved it. And in the Midwest, kind of, it was okay. But, there's something, I love New York. I couldn't, be anyplace else. But if it has a good ending, it can't be serious. Do you know what I mean? That's here. And if it discusses anything internal, and in the West Coast, it was, so I could see it as I went across the country with the book tour. But it's interesting that it has been the most read and commented upon and remaining popular book that I've written, I think.
Well, let's give a hand to the Steinem and have some questions. As you realize, we started a little late, so we have about 25 minutes for questions. You know how I believe with the Buddhist loving compassion, if you're going on too long, I will say, you really need to stop. So say your name, ask your question, be as brief as you can, and you don't have to be shy, but, don't give a speech. We don't have that much time. Okay, your name?
But you could give us answers, too. And organizing announcements are allowed, Right. Troublemaking announcements are good.
Hi, I'm Sydney. Thank you so much, both of you. My question is actually more for Belle. In your book, All About Love, you talk about the experience of true love in this way that's very embodied.
Can you hear?
She's talking about all about love, and I talk about true love, but try to speak louder.
In this way that's very embodied.
Yes.
And I think that was a really powerful and a really courageous move to make. And I wonder if you've had similarly an experience of sort of true learning or true wisdom as part of that, as part of the movement, and if you could talk about that and what it feels like in an embodied way.
Well, I don't know how to talk about that because everything about what I am every day of my life is changed by some book I'm reading. you know, books not only teach us things, they reshape what we knew before we read them. And so I think that the list of books that have changed me and moved me, right now, like, I'm really into an old book by Richard Foster, Spiritual Discipline. And I tend to read books over and over again that teach me something. I hope that that's adequate. Okay, your name?
My name is Nivia Castro, and for this Gloria, I'm always honored to see you, and I will come see you anytime. I've never met you, Belle, and so I thought a conversation with Gloria and Belle, that has to be good. I have to come, no matter what I'm doing. And I do have a question for you. Loved seeing you last night in The Good Wife. That was such a surprise, real cool surprise. I want to know, what are you, each of you, what are you working on now? What are you doing?
I want to do more work on spirituality and spiritual growth, because I really do think that love is where our hope of ending domination is. And I want to write more books that serve as a light on that path for people. That's where I am, and I'm always pushing and bugging her to write more and more and more.
Yes, and she puts me to shame with the right. Well, I hope and believe that I'm finishing a book about being on the road, that I'm too much on the road to finish, and have spent, decades doing. And what I want to do next is to, I'm not sure I can do this, actually. Wilma Mankiller, you know Wilma Mankiller was the chief of the Cherokee Nation for 8 years, and should have been president of the country, a great woman. We wanted to write a book together that was about features of original cultures that we could learn from. Just very short, simple. For instance, one example is that in one of the oldest original cultures in Ghana, people are indeed punished if they do something that's damaging to the group or destructive by being isolated for a bit. But when they are brought back into the community, there's a long ritual amount of time in which everybody tells them every good thing they ever did. Okay, is that not the opposite of what we do? We not only imprison people wrongly, but when they come out, we continue to punish them. And
That's
we
enough.
know, yeah. So anyway,
I'm just looking at our time and our rows
That's it.
of people. That was very good, though. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Harry Fernandez. I have a question sort of about how I feel a good number of men who aren't feminists have this kind of ideal that feminists are all men haters, which isn't a new thing, but there's this kind of new, I guess, counter-feminism ideal. I guess the most common term you hear is like feminazi. I'm wondering if you have any idea of where the new counter-feminism ideal came from, and if you know kind of what's perpetuating
Rush Limbaugh, I believe. I'm pretty sure, I don't want to give him credit for anything, but I'm pretty sure that he coined the term feminazi, and he uses it constantly, right? And it's so interesting because it's a complete opposite of the case. The National Socialists were wildly anti-feminist, right?
Your name, your question?
Hi, my name is Tsage Tefesa, and my question is, sometimes I feel like, within feminism and other activist and social justice movements, we have a lot of toxicity around critiquing each other, but I also feel like calling out and calling in folks around either the problematic things we may perceive them doing or whatever is really important. So I wonder how both of you see the practice of calling in and how you might do that in a way that doesn't, that doesn't discourage folks from being a part of the conversation or the movement, but also still holds them up to accountability and things.
Well,
That's a great question.
Many of you know that tomorrow night I'll be talking to Laverne Cox, And I'm not a super big fan of Orange is the New Black, but the one relationship in that TV show that I think is teaching people something different is the relationship between Sophia and Crystal, and how they have conflict and how they resolve issues. Because I think that for many of us, we don't know how. I mean, at one point I asked my body of black students, have you ever seen a black man and a black woman in conflict together, talking, resolving? And the answer for all of us, for the most part, was no, we had not. So how can we, if we haven't seen that modeled, how can we bring that into being? And I do think that that's one of the really progressive moments in Orange is the New Black. I mean, when Crystal desires a man, and Sophia has difficulty with that. When Sophia wants Crystal to bring drugs, I mean, that whole particular conversation of feedback and critical dialogue. And it seems to me that this is something we are still trying to learn. How do we engage in useful critical dialogue, dissenting opinions without breaking apart?
Yeah, this is hard for me too, because I hate conflict, you know, so I'm in the wrong business, you know. But I try to remember, I try to say to myself, okay, you would not want someone to just be mad at you and not tell you, right? So how would you want someone to tell you that you were fucking up in a way that could be heard and that is useful and, you know, so I just try to tell other people the way I wish they would tell me, because I really don't want them just to internally say, you know, that I've done something wrong and not tell me. And it takes it. I have to get myself into it. I try to think, what would Bella Abzug do? Because she was really good at conflict, right? And I think I've improved, and I've come to have faith that it's, as you say, it is a really important thing to do, and also at the same time to remember, not to be corny about this, but you can control your behavior, but you can't control somebody else's behavior. So just to say it and to try to find shared grounds, but at least to know that you said it and listen to the response.
Your question?
I think it's over there.
I think I'm in charge, but okay.
Thank you.
Your
Hi,
name?
my name is Vivian Njoku, and I just want to say it's such an honor. I feel like this is one of those moments I'll be talking about, honestly, with my grandchildren, male and female, to say, I saw Gloria Steinem dogs. So thank you so much. And you guys are kind of talking about it in that last response, but something you said earlier about we are existing in silos, you know, all the different movements are broken up and broken apart. And a way that I constantly check in with myself is, you know, if this life or if this moment is the opening scene of a film and you play it out, you know, how does this film end? And I think that we kind of know if we are in this opening scene right now of the world and the way it is, we know how it's going to end. So my question to you all is what are those systems, what are those silos, how do we begin to put it together so that we can change the ending? I know it's big.
I think we just know the silos don't work. You know, first of all, at a very basic level, our adversaries are the same people. You know, so the homophobic folks are the anti-feminist folks, and even though on campuses they are completely, you know, they say, okay, how come the same groups are anti-lesbian and anti-birth control? I mean, it doesn't make sense. But it does make sense. But it does make sense because those groups are against any sexual expression that cannot end in conception.
Yes.
And our adversaries are the same people. And we better be as aware of that as our adversaries are. And, you know, that goes, I mean, obviously race, caste, class multiplies the motive to control reproduction and to perpetuate. I mean, they just are intertwined, so much so. I mean, you know, intersectionality is a wonderful word. I tend to say intertwined, because intersection sounds like it's one place. Intertwined is, I don't know, more organic to me. But they cannot be uprooted by themselves. It's impossible.
Well, I think one important place of struggle is being local, because I think we can affect so much more change in the local environments where we live. Like for me, living in a small town, I can have so much more effect on the hunger of people in Appalachia by working with the food bank that is there. And I encourage you to think about that. Even in New York City, in the small radius of where you live, where there are probably as many people as in my little town that I live in, what are you doing? A lot of times when I wake up in the morning, I want to ask myself, what are you doing today? What are you doing, Belle, to end domination today? What form is your resistance going to take today? You?
Okay.
Your name?
My name is Sansara Taylor, and I was very provoked by the discussion of men raising children, both the impact on the children and on the men. And I'm sure it's true, the socializing sort of effect it has on the men, but then as Belle was saying, the men go off in the world, and the institutions are still patriarchal, they're still imperialist, it's bigger than that. So the kids end up back in that world, the men end up back in that world, the wars continue, the poverty continues, the mass incarceration, all of this. So to me, my question and my rabble-rousing announcement are joined, which is that what do you think in terms of the dismantling of that larger institution, the patriarchy, imperialist, capitalist structures? And what do you see the relationship of the spirituality or the religious to that? And my announcement is that Cornel West and Bob Avakian are having a dialogue on revolution and religion on November 15th, which everybody should come to. And I would actually like to hear you guys' response to that as well.
Well, I can just say that part of what Thich Nhat Hanh, Vietnamese Buddhist monk, helped me to see is that part of, I think, a big problem we have in the US is we're always looking for some grandiose, monumental change and how we can affect that. And he really helped me to see that small change, that the pebble that creates the ripples. And I think that we see that in a lot of places, that that's where our hope lies, not in some grandiose, how will we topple this patriarchal system. I mean, isn't that part of the anguish many people have had about Obama, that people thought he would demolish so much that it was beyond his power to do? If they understood the structure of the systems that we live within, then they would understand that. But we could ask, okay, what is it if you could go to this man tomorrow and say, this is what I would like you to do, what would that be? What would be the agenda? That's such a large question. Do you want to answer it, or do we want to go on? Because we're running out of time.
Yeah, I think we are. I think in general that I agree with you, we worry too much about doing something up here that we can. We worry about what we should do. Do whatever you can. Every day, with your money, with each other, and it is like a tree. It does change, it does grow like a tree, and the results are amazing. I'm not saying to neglect the big thing and to fail. Just your naming the big thing is already important.
I mean,
just all of us naming it, right?
Gloria and I both can say, we remember a time when if we were giving a talk, this room would be primarily white and primarily female. And you have only to look around you to see, as Grace Paley would say, enormous changes, that something has changed, something has opened up. Your name?
Hi, I'm Sebastian. Recently I've been having some, conflicts in defining myself as a feminist and defining myself more as an activist feminist ally. Because while I understand that there's a common enemy and the patriarchy is gender neutral, I also don't think that the best use of my time is mansplaining feminism to women. As a white reading Latino straight male. And then I heard you today say that one of the shortcomings of feminism is dealing with violence and dealing with present fathers. I wonder, is that not something that we should be dealing with, and is that something that us men should be dealing with under the feminist banner?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And there are many, groups of men dealing with exactly what you say, from professional football players who go around talking about domestic violence, which the NFL ought to listen to, because they talk about their mothers and what it meant to them to see their mothers humiliated and beaten every day, and they are incredibly effective. To pioneer groups like the Oakland Men's Project and Michael Kimmel, who is collecting all of this information. There are a lot of great books. There's such a powerful and important men's movement of men feminists, just like there was a powerful and important group of white folks who were anti-racist. And it's not the same thing as living every day, as a person of color, but it is saying very clearly that everybody's put in a prison. And I am not going to, feminism means that men would live, if you take away the deaths attributable to the masculine role, men live about 5 years more. What other movement has 5 years of extra life to? So I think we all have motivation to be feminists and to be anti-racist, whoever we are.
Your name?
Hi, my name's Jean, and my question is a little bit about domestic violence and poverty, because what I see that's never really being addressed is that a lot of women are really poor. So, okay, they'll have a partner, maybe he's abusive. Well, what are they going to do? And then if they leave him and they go on welfare, they don't get enough money to really live, so then they have to find another guy who every once in a while will slip them some money. And then, if he smacks them in the face or something, then that means like they can't buy sneakers for their kids because they don't give you enough money to live on. And
So what's the question there?
The question is, I feel like poor women are kind of just left behind, because they're forced to put up with this abuse.
I just want to say one thing, which is that the studies which doesn't really address what you're saying, but I think it's important to recognize that the studies that we know of say there was a precinct in Darien, Connecticut, a rich precinct, and there was a precinct in Harlem, and the incidence of domestic violence was the same. So...
Good point, G.
But it is absolutely true that the economic alternatives are, that's what shelters are about, that's what people who take people into their homes are about. There's no doubt that there's a huge, huge economic influence, but the biggest influence of all is that that's when a woman is most likely to get killed, just before she leaves or just after she leaves, because she is escaping control. So when people say, why didn't she leave? It's because she knew what would happen. And if there's a very good film documentary about real cases coming on HBO called Private Violence, and I recommend it to you. You can, I don't know when it is, but it's on HBO.
Your question?
Hi, my name's Nicole. I actually take a class with Dean Browner, and in it we often talk about oppressive discourses. And I've noticed this language barrier within the feminist movement at times when we're willing to talk about success in terms of oppressive discourses. And I struggle to connect with other feminists at times with such varying language uses. And I wonder, how can I, as a feminist, connect with other feminists with this language barrier?
Just talk the way you can be understood. I'm going to put a big sign on the road to Harvard, Yale, and Princeton that says, "Beware deconstruction ahead." If we can't get it off the page and out of the conversation into our lives, then how good is it? Do you know how you know when somebody's really smart? You understand every word they say.
Your question? You may notice that I'm kind of pushing our questions along because we're running out of time. Yes.
Hi, how you doing? I'm Katie. I was hoping that you guys could speak to the current movement on college campuses to address sexual assault. Specifically, what successful initiatives have you seen, if any, that create space for women to voice their stories, considering that our schools and our legal system have failed to address these things for women? And also, what successful initiatives have you seen, if any, to educate young women, but especially young men, just about what violence is? Because I go to Barnard, and I've realized that a lot of my male friends who I consider progressive, educated, good people don't actually even know what sexual violence towards women means and what it is.
Have you seen the woman with the mattress?
Yeah,
Have you seen her? Yeah. I mean, do you know about this? It's a woman who was sexually assaulted on campus and is going around the campus of Columbia and Barnard carrying a mattress on her back as a performance piece of suffering and what happened. And so, I mean, it's fascinating because
But Columbia has not kicked out her sexual assailant. I mean,
but
like,
yes, because Columbia, her sexual assailant is still on campus. You know, I think that obviously consciousness comes first, and then remedies and so on. So we've known this for a long time. There have been Take Back the Night marches. I mean, we've been working at this for a long time. But I think now that Title IX is being used to actually threaten campuses with taking money away if they don't address this, which is very helpful. There's a higher consciousness, and also, parents are beginning to understand. I mean, campuses were afraid that parents wouldn't bring put their daughters on campus if they had a high rate of sexual assault. Parents are beginning to understand, only send your daughter to a campus that records its sexual assault. If they say they have none or a few, they're lying. So this is a campus of it. So I think altogether we're inching forward, and there's also very important work now on betrayal trauma. That is, something terrible happens to you, but what also happens when you're a sexually abused kid and your parents don't believe you, or when the university or college doesn't help you, or when the cops don't help. The whole second level of betrayal trauma for which the universities and colleges are responsible.
Your question?
Hi, my name is Emily. This is really amazing that I get to ask both of you this question. I guess I'm feeling like my tension with the feminist movement right now is there's sort of all of these ideas that get sort of folded back into neoliberalism. And like Gloria, when you were saying contemporary feminism is able, now you're allowed to call the cops on your neighbors or whatever. And then it's like, there's this huge mass incarceration, which is very violent and not feminist at all. And it's like, how do we reconcile what feminism has actually done, which I don't really know how progressive it is, versus how I feel, which is I feel like a feminist and I want to use that analysis to change things and move forward. So I'm just going to ask that really hard question.
One situation at a time. You'll get paralyzed if you think, but if you think about a particular situation of sexual assault and should that person be on campus, or a particular prison, for instance, into which people are wrongly, go for the particular and build from there. Does that make sense?
I guess so, but I think there are also systems that are really integrated into everything, and it's really hard to imagine getting rid of them with
do it anyway. Just do it.
Okay.
Mike, a question over here. Your name?
Hello? All right. My name is Kelvin. I meditated a lot on what was going to be brought up in this conversation, and I'm really happy to hear about spirituality, which I think is the root cause of this woman hate. And my thing is, can we change our perspective on the story of Eve? I see it as a first blessing for us to experience our humanity through pain of having to give labor. Miracles are born. If spirituality is not a point of focus, religious leaders will continue to manipulate their male dominance as far as we allow them to. With the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, it has been unveiled that Mary Magdalene, who is not referenced once as being a prostitute, was to become the first pope to balance the divine between the sexes.
Well, we just thank you for sharing that information for people who don't know. Did you have a question from that?
My question is for everybody. So tonight when you're having dinner, can we change our perspective on original sin? Because that is the root blame of all the problem.
Yes, we can say it doesn't exist. There is no original sin.
Hi, my name is Roman Chernaluski, and you had said before that you believe that there's been incredible progress in bringing more feminist studies to other communities than white or white identifying and domestic atmospheres. I believe it's possible that a lot more could be done considering the audience today. It's still very representative that much proliferation of feminist theory is still being done very strongly in college student communities and communities of white and white identifying students from domestic backgrounds. Now, I'm a member of the Black Male Initiative at Hunter College, Kingsborough Community College. Of course, I am not white nor black, but I fit in somewhere. My community is represented with some degree of feminist study. But my friends, I noticed that a lot of them are black Latino males, and they're coming from disadvantaged communities or communal communities, communities where they interact with a lot. How do you bring feminist and critical theory to their minds when they function as agents of patriarchy without even being aware that they are? That is the hardest part.
You just said it. You have to educate for critical consciousness. That is the only way so that people can understand the role that they play. And we know from a lot of the teaching to transgress that's happening in prisons that men are capable of understanding as they learn what patriarchy is and the role that they play in it. I'm going to have to do the unpleasant thing of asking our remaining people to ask their questions, and then we'll try to answer them in some kind of collective way. I don't know how we'll do that since both of us are aging and have memory issues, but still. Can you say your name and ask your question?
Yes, my name is Purple. With the wellness and the warrior work that is being done, I'm noticing we're not sustaining, we're not being 80 years old anymore with toxicity, with internalized oppression. What message will you offer for the wellness for wellness workers, because people are suffering in silence, and then to be strengthened and return to the families, because that is our family, even though, yes, they taught us and we learned to love the people we don't like, but those families are our community as well. What do we do?
Okay, and then the next question, I'm going to go finish this line and come over here. Your name?
Hi, I'm Canty. I was wondering, I have many men in my life and in my chosen family and in my family who are victims of domestic violence, and clearly, but the only way it's seen is through scars on their bodies and through mentalities that they have, and it's not something that is omitted. And I wanted to know what you guys feel on the progress in systems and internally and externally on omissions of domestic violence and a family history of domestic violence, and carrying a story and teaching a lesson when oftentimes it isn't omitted or shared.
Hey, I'm Kat. So I've just recently started to identify out loud as a feminist, and I think that says a lot about the fact that I'm just recently starting to out loudly identify as a feminist. Says a lot about the shame that I associated with being a feminist because of what other people said and the stigma against it. And I guess I just wanted to know how to what advice you guys would have for reclaiming the word and for reclaiming your identity and not being afraid to say what you feel and act on it.
My name is Ileana Jimenez, and I'm a high school teacher. I'm here with half of a class that I'm teaching on feminism and activism to high school students. The answer to the question of critical consciousness for education is to start this in K through 12 education. And my question is, how can we begin? Really, the silos is about leaving out education. When we talk about all the different silos, it's immigration or LGBT issues or, fill in the blank. But we never talk about schools. How can we begin to galvanize the most leading feminists to address the corporatization of schools, the poverty in schools? That's where it's going to begin. How can we begin to address violence? The way we're going to get rid of violence is by starting K through 12 talking about these kinds of issues. That's how we'll begin to break down the generations of violence. How can we galvanize and begin in the schools?
Well, I think you just laid out where the issue has to start, and people have to think through what they need to do. Your question?
I'm Sharon, and I think that I heard a little bit of discouragement in your question, what has feminism done? and also in the young woman about 3 ahead of me in, all these, how are we going to dismantle all this? And I think that we need to think about the economics, the fear of scarcity, and and scarcity itself, our feed dominance, and feed the patriarchy. And so I think that the economic issues that we're facing now in this country, I think we can't be discouraged about feminism. I'm your age, and I just it's revolutionized my life, and I think but it can't do everything, and it's not always going to be an upward march. There's going to be cycles of backsliding and then going forward again. And I think we have to think about the economics that are smacking us in the face and smacking us with this violence that we're seeing, and also the anti-feminist thing about reproductive rights. It's like black.
Okay, thank you.
So I think we got to think about that.
Hi, my name is Saskia. And I have some kind of prickly questions, I guess, because you have both devoted your lives to writing and activism. So what happens, and is it even possible for us to win this fight? Is there sort of activism because it's the cause that you enjoy? Not activism for activism's sake, but is there something like that if we won this miraculously, we would be lost? So how do you even begin to consider that?
Hi, my name is Paul. It's more of a personal question. Ever since I've been reading up on feminism and the equality of sexes and sexuality and that thing, I've been struggling with things that I've been accustomed to for my entire life. And one of the main things has been chivalry, and it's been translating over into my romantic relationship. And I can see the tension building and forming. Things that I have been accustomed to and things that she's come to have slowed down, and I've been more reluctant to do certain things. I was wondering if you have any alternate ideas about chivalry and how you think about that in terms of romantic relationships and how I could possibly, save what I have.
Well, I think that in this last batch of questions, a lot of people have put stuff on the table that was really less a question and more stuff for us to think about. I can honestly say, I don't spend a minute thinking about chivalry, so I am not in a position to speak with any degree of sensitivity to that issue. Though I do think it's something to put on the table. We're not answering your question, though we love you. It's time, folks. We've gone way past our time, and remember that when we go way past our time, we're keeping the people who work here past their time, and we have to respect that. And Gloria Marie, what do you have to tell us before we say goodnight? Any of those questions?
I feel like I'm impressing the people who have to. Okay, I'll try to be short. Here's what I think. I think that one of the things we can learn from so-called domestic violence or original, whatever, is the paradigm of other violence, right? Okay. So I think in a way that's where the country is. We've come far enough. We have Occupy movements. We're conscious of the economic division. We're conscious of the prison industrial complex. We've turned against 2 wars a lot faster than we did against Vietnam. We're about to no longer be a majority European American white country. Things are really changing, and there is a backlash against the change, a really dangerous backlash against the change. So I think 2 things are true at the same time, not just one. One, we are in a time of great danger because, as with domestic violence, we're about to escape. And that's a time of huge danger. We have to look after each other and be aware of the danger. And the second thing is, we're not going to stop. I mean, in the same way that we would never tell somebody to go back to a violent household, we are not going to stop. We are going to keep going. And both those things are true at the same time. So please introduce yourselves to each other, meet each other, leave here with some new friend, colleague, you know, revolutionary comrade, love affair, who knows, you know? Because we want everybody here's life to be a little better because you were here. Okay, thank you.
Again, thank you.